Well, hello. This is part three in our series where we are having conversation with Professor Dale Allison, who is professor of New Testament studies at Princeton Theological Seminary. We are discussing his forthcoming book, Arguing Resurrection. Professor Allison, welcome back.
Good to be back.
All right. So, in this session, we're going to talk about the miraculous. And I just want to say it's this session that is going to be, it's going to make some people squirm in their chairs, evangelicals and skeptics alike. There were some things in this section of your book that made me feel a little uncomfortable. But boy, you do just such a great job in your book at in discussing these things. Appreciate your honesty, your authenticity, your transparency. So let's just dive right into this. A lot of this, you said in the previous segment, you do believe that Jesus rose from the dead with qualifications, but this requires the miraculous. It requires the supernatural, a spiritual dimension of reality. I mean, how do you handle the miraculous?
Well, my view here, I think, is very idiosyncratic. So I don't find the philosophical discussions of miracles to be very interesting. For me, it is an empirical question. And for me, Gregory of Nyssa was on target that we tend to decide what's possible through our own experience. So I don't know what your hearers are going to do with this, but my experience has been exceedingly strange. So has the experience of members of my immediate family. So let me just say a couple of things here. Once, or let's see, I believe that twice. And by the way, I don't think anyone should believe me. You really shouldn't. But I believe that twice. I'm firmly convinced that twice I saw the future. I saw things before they happened, once in a dream, once while wide awake. That's not supposed to happen. It doesn't fit anything in my high school or college textbooks. It doesn't fit the paradigm of reductionistic materialism that many scientists ascribe to. But for me, far more interesting than that, and we probably haven't ever talked about this before, and I'm going to be my description here is going to be thin, okay? But I do believe that I once saw a physical object in one part of a room blink out of existence and appear on the other side of the room. Now, I don't think anyone should believe me. I really don't. For all you know, I could be lying or I could be self-deceived. But here's the thing. This happened to me, this event, and I witnessed it. And I therefore believe that it happened. And if it happened, materialism is false. It is not true. And the world is a very strange place. So when this happened, one of the things I called a friend, first of all, a skeptical friend, a scientist, and I said, here's what happened. I'll go through it step by step. You give me a rational explanation for what I just witnessed. He came up with nothing. Actually, what he came up with nothing. And then several years later, I was talking to a pastor, and I gave him the details, which I haven't given you. And he said, Allison, I know what that was about. And I said, you do? My half serious thought when it first happened was this must be a mischievous spirit, not an angel or a demon, but just some, like a jinn, a genie, somebody just playing a joke on me. He said, no. He said, Allison, this was God. I said, it was God? He said, yes. God knows that you're a skeptical historian, and God wants you to think that the tomb was empty. So God showed you that really strange things can happen with matter. So this is God's way of telling you should believe in the resurrection of Jesus. Okay, well, that's very clever. Very nice. I can't tell you that it's false. But you see, what this raises for me is the problem of agency. So there are two two things, two separate things when it comes to miracles. One is, do inexplicable, bizarre things happen? All right. The second question is, if something bizarre, inexplicable, beyond reason or explanation happened, who did it? What is the agent? Who is the agent? What is the cause? Those are two separate questions. And you can have an inexplicable event and not know who the agent was. So that's the first thing. Here's the second thing. The same is true even in a religious context. So if I recall rightly, you can correct me, but I think one of your attempts to define miracle was something like the inexplicable that takes place in a certain religious context. Well, let me give you
that's how to distinguish a miracle from, let's say, an anomaly. Is
okay.
How I use that.
So let me ask you this, which I suppose is also asking your hearers this. Hypothetically, let's just take for granted that the canonical testimony given in the canonization of Joseph of Cupertino is correct. This is a guy who lived several centuries ago in Italy, and at his beatification proceedings, over 100 people testified that they saw this guy levitate, go off the ground, not a half inch, not an inch, but really get up there, okay? And this included a pope, this included bishops, this included some Protestants who were skeptical, included lots of people, all right? So let's just say this happened. Let's say that this funny little friar occasionally would pop off the ground. By the way, it always happened when he was in some sort of meditative state. So who did this? Well, Roman Catholic tradition says God did it. God made him fly, okay? He flew. I believe he's the patron saint of pilots, airplane pilots. I think that's really true. Anyway, who did this? It's really hard for me to think that God just, every now and then said, let's raise Joseph off the ground. This will be fun. If this happened, I don't know what the cause is. I don't know what the explanation is. Maybe it's some hidden, latent, weird human ability. I simply don't know. But if these, again, hypothetically, if these things took place, they took place when he was praying. They took place when he was in church. He was a very pious person. The context is nothing but religion, nothing but Roman Catholicism several centuries ago. So who did it? So for me, the question is always, did something happen? One. Two, who or what was the agent? And for me, actually, the question of agency is more difficult than the question of miracles, because I actually, I think Craig Keener's book has some stories in it. The big 2-volume miracle thing.
Sure.
It has some of those stories I think I can explain away as a critical historian, but some of them are really interesting. I have no reason to doubt all of them that seem to break natural law, for example. And I've seen things in my own experience and in my immediate family that break natural law, or what we call natural law. So for me, this is just an empirical question. One, agency, that's a real problem. Okay?
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. Sometimes the work of the historian, that's where it ends. It's did the event occur? And that's where it ends. It's like with the resurrection of Jesus. I think the historian, as you do, the historian can conclude that Jesus rose from the dead, but that's where the work of the historian stops. We don't have the tools to ascertain that God did it, or whether an alien in a parallel universe faked this and made Jesus rise in order to deceive humans into thinking that Jesus is God's son, and therefore he gets his PhD
Yeah.
in this parallel universe. I mean, because he was able to accomplish his goal. That's something. I mean, we can have our opinions as historians, but we don't have the tools to be able to affirm or confirm one and not the other. My thing is when I talk about the religio historical context is to say it's more likely that what we have on our hand is a miracle rather than an anomaly. And that's saying that the event occurred, assuming, like you said, the event occurred. It's a miracle rather than an anomaly. Or we could even just say it's a supernatural event and not identify God as the cause. It could be an alien. It could be some kind of a demon or an angel doing it. But if we assume that the event occurred, the way we distinguish it as a miracle from an anomaly is to say it occurred in a context charged with the religious significance. And that's what I'd say about this saint that you mentioned.
Okay. All right. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I think
I know you criticized me for that in the book, and understood where you were coming from. That's just my answer to your criticism.
Okay. All right. Maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you did interact with some of my work on there. And I think you did a fair-minded treatment of all this. So, all right, you have the section of your book entitled Thinking with Parallels. I mean, this is a challenging section. It challenged me. Well, what are you up to there?
So I think the easiest way to do this is just to introduce one of the chapters. So one of the chapters is called something like Seeing Mary. And I focus on sightings, alleged sightings of the Virgin Mary in Zaytun, Egypt, that started in 1968. Now, I think this is a fascinating phenomenon. And what happened is, over a period of literally months, there was, I think it was St. Mary's Orthodox Church in Zaytun, Egypt, which is a suburb of Cairo. On the dome of this church, there was a figure of light. And this figure of light was seen by literally hundreds of thousands of people. The crowds were gigantic. And it was seen by Christians. It was seen by Muslims. It was seen by journalists. It was seen by people who didn't have any religious beliefs. And the crowds thought it was Mary. Now, this really happened. It's not a legend. It's not a myth. Actually, here in New Jersey, I live in Princeton. Here in New Jersey, there are lots of Coptic Christians who were in Cairo in the 1960s. And I had a student interview a bunch of them for a paper he wrote. We have lots of firsthand testimony. This was also investigated by the Orthodox Church. I know the grandson of the hierarch who did the investigation. This is not a legend. It's not a myth. Okay, so this event is, in my judgment, unexplainable in conventional terms. Actually, the city officials wondered if it couldn't be some sort of weird light show, and they cut off electricity to that neighborhood. The lights were still there. They were trying to figure out what the heck is going on. The church authorities investigated, and the Coptic Orthodox authorities said, we think this is Mary up there. All right. So here's the problem. In this chapter, I talk about this event, and then I look at some of the explanations for it. One, of course, is that this is the Blessed Virgin Mary. Then there are some people who've tried to explain it in terms of earthquake, lights, fault lights, and all sorts of other options. And I give reasons why nothing makes any sense. Okay? So I can draw lessons from this. My first lesson is that I believe that there are inexplicable events in the world, things that historians and reasonable people can look at and say, wow, I don't know what that is. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. That's one thing. The second thing I can do with this is I can say, well, this is actually a word of caution because I'm not sure how to explain this, but I think I know a lot more about these appearances than the appearances in the New Testament. Again, we have some photos. Maybe they've been doctored a little bit. I don't know, but we have some photos. We have tons of firsthand testimony. This is a real thing. It's real. And I don't know what to make of it. So that gives me some caution, given the abundance of testimony and the fact that I still don't know. Isn't that caution for the New Testament, about which we know no less? But here's a third lesson from this, and this actually has to do with worldview. So if you talk to Coptic Christians, they'll tell me, "What's wrong with you, Allison?" So this was seen by hundreds of thousands of people. It was photographed. People said it looked like Mary. There were these little light doves flying around. There were all sorts of healings that went on there at the site. The city officials tried to figure out what was happening. They came up with no explanation. All the explanations of the skeptics are bogus. What's wrong with you, Allison? Get on board. This is Mary. Okay. Now, I'm a skeptic. I suppose it's in part because I'm a Protestant, and it's just kind of hard for me to think this was really Mary. That's maybe part of it. Part of it is, I think, the testimony makes me think this was a little mechanical, and that bothers me. There's also no verbal communication of any sort. So there are these little things that bother me. But here's the point. Looking at it from the point of view of a Coptic Christian, this is Mary, and anyone who doesn't see this is just blind. But I'm standing outside and looking at this and saying, you know what? This helps me understand the skeptic of the New Testament accounts a little better, because even though I don't have a story, I'm not willing to go there. This actually teaches me something about worldviews and how hard they are to break, how difficult they are to break. What's wrong with me? I think I'm being a little bit like the skeptic of the resurrection when I'm not willing to say, it's Mary. Come on, wake up. What's wrong with you? So that's one of the things. That's another lesson that I pull out of it. So that's the kind of thing I'm doing. I'm looking at parallels. I'm not saying that looking at a parallel like this isn't explaining away anything in the New Testament. It's just a way of thinking about what happened. So that's what I mean by thinking with parallels, looking at visions of Mary in this case, and asking, does this teach us anything? Can we learn anything about the New Testament from this? So that's one example. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So now come to you have a chapter titled Rainbow Body. And I found that chapter quite interesting. And in fact, this is the part of the book that made me uneasy. I guess you could say theologically uneasy. And, I'm looking at, I was unfamiliar with rainbow bodies before this. And wow, looking at what you cover in there, there's some really interesting data to which you appeal. I don't know what to do with it, to be honest with you. But let's talk about rainbow bodies here. Yeah, go ahead and tell us, what are rainbow bodies?
Okay, so I didn't know anything about this until a few years ago myself. But this is a tradition within Tibetan Buddhism. And according to this tradition, certain advanced Buddhist masters, upon dying, achieve rainbow body. And what that means is that their bodies shrink out of existence within a few days of their death. Some of these traditions say that, some hair and fingernails were left. That's all. Weirdly enough, very weirdly enough, there are also people who sort of shrink halfway and stop. Shrink halfway and stop. And by the way, I'm like you, Mike. I really don't have any idea what to make of this stuff. But there are pictures online of some Buddhist masters who are dead. and they look like they've shrunk, and they're in their clothes, and their clothes are way bigger than they are. I don't know. I don't have any idea what to do with this, but
Honey, I shrunk the priest.
yeah, okay. Well, in Tibetan Buddhism, this is a part of leaving the world, or can be part of leaving the world, and it's called rainbow body because rainbows are supposedly seen around the sites where this happens. Now, it turns out that these stories are very old. There are lots of them, but this is an ongoing tradition, and that interests me especially. So two of them took place within the last 25 years, allegedly. A Roman Catholic priest who's a Tibetan scholar was able to go to Tibet, talk to some people, interview people on the scene for one of these, read a biography that was written within a year or two of one of these fellows passing. The Dalai Lama, in an interview, was familiar with the other case, seems to accept it as actually happening, which is really interesting. If you read the Dalai Lama, he's skeptical about some things, skeptical about some miracles, uncommitted to others. He hangs out with scientists, who study Buddhist meditation and all that. He's not a naive, uninformed person. And he thinks this happened through contacts he knows in Tibet, that it happened on this one occasion. So I document this, and then I say, after I've documented this tradition, I say, I don't know what to make of it. And I actually don't think I'm qualified to have an opinion because I don't know the Tibetan literature. I'm not an expert on Buddhism. I've never been to Tibet, and so on and so on. I'm just an amateur looking in and saying this is really interesting. But then what I do is I ask some questions. I ask, for example, what would this mean if all this is bunk? That is, if all of this is not true. We have eyewitnesses making claims about disappearing bodies in the modern world. How does that happen? The skeptics would be delighted to find out that this is all bunk, right? Mm-hmm. Well, but what happens if it's not all bunk? What happens if occasionally, I'm just being open-minded, right? Apologists are always telling us to be open-minded about, telling skeptics, you got to keep an open mind here. Okay, so I'm trying to have an open mind. What if this occasionally happens? What would it mean? So the chapter then looks at the options, at the alternatives. I don't commit myself to anything. Well, what I do say is that
let's look at those 6 options. Okay, for a second, because I think they're interesting. So those 6 interpretations of the phenomena that to which you appeal are: number 1, could be fiction and or misperception. Number 2, it could be the phenomena could be real, and the cause is Satan or demons.
Yep.
But and you point out how we look at that. I think in Revelation where it says the Antichrist will be raised from the dead. So the plus in Egypt you had the magicians when Moses did some of the things. They turned their own staffs into snakes, and then Moses turned his into a snake that ate the others. So, I mean, we can, according to scripture, that would say that Satan or the forces of darkness can actually do these supernatural things. So I admit, though, that for us to say, well, these rainbow bodies, that's Satan doing this to deceive the Buddhists, that does seem ad hoc. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is that this argument bothers me for any number of reasons, but one simple reason is what people did with Jesus. This is what they do with Jesus in Matthew 11. This is what they do with him in Mark 3. They say, I'm sorry, Matthew 12 and Luke 11. They say, well, he casts out demons. Look at that. Must be the devil. I'm really hesitant to take that rhetorical move, make that rhetorical move for any number of reasons. But also, you're right. It's ad hoc. It's easy. It's cheap. Everything that doesn't fit what you believe, you can explain away that way. And so, also, well, I'll just leave it at that. Okay. So
So
that's not an option for me.
So number one, fiction and or misperception. Number two, Satan or demons. Number three, the phenomena is real. It's just the cause is unknown. Number four, the phenomena is real, but it's attributed to either the Christian God, the Hindu deity, Buddhist power, or a transcendent reality that's imperfectly revealed in different religions.
Yeah.
Number five, the disappearance of corpses is attributed to rainbow body by Buddhists and resurrection by Christians, given their eschatological expectations. And number six, you have unfathomed potential of humans. In other words, it's an anomaly. It's a natural thing. It's a natural occurrence, but we don't understand why. So those are
Yeah.
the six different ways that you present of interpreting the data for rainbow bodies. Yeah, did I leave anything out? What would you
No,
like to
no,
say?
no, no. But so I don't come to any conclusion in this chapter except to say people ought to look into this. That's it. And I actually know a PhD student who is in Tibet right now, trying to do a little investigation of this stuff. Since this is an ongoing tradition, and since there are supposedly half-shrunk corpses from people, and since there are supposedly eyewitnesses, we might be able to learn something. Although you have to remember that Tibetan Buddhists have a very strong esoteric tradition, and they are serious about their esoteric traditions, and they don't like sharing everything with people like you and me because we are not members of a lineage. So it's going to be really hard to get much out of this. I've actually made some inquiries indirectly through other people here in the States to Tibetan Buddhists who are in this country and who know about these things, and they don't want to share what they know with me, right? But there are a couple of other things here. One is I do think that we need to be open-minded. We have to be if we're not going to be hypocrites, because we're always telling everybody else. Let's be honest with the evidence. Look at it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
In fact, I like, there's a statement I want to read from your book. Let me read it. It's a good one. Quote, whichever possibility or combination of possibilities one embraces, a fair, informed judgment will require open-minded inquiry, not knee-jerk defensiveness. One will need to leave the echo chamber of one's sacred discourse and acquire unfeigned knowledge of a broader religious claim, or a broader religious realm, end quote. You know, for the historian, I mean, I can understand a Christian might look and say, okay, well, this just is of not of much interest to me. I'm just moving on with my faith. I believe, people of different faith. But a historian, if we're approaching this as a historian, that's a very fair-minded statement that you make there.
And the other thing to add to that is I think that apologists should ask themselves whether their arguments that they apply to the resurrection apply equally to this stuff. And if so, what does that mean? If not, give us really good explanations as to why they do not. So, yeah, I'm just saying, look at this. Come on, look at this. We haven't done that. The skeptics will like this because they'll just assume it's all bunk, right? So more parallels to explain away.
Yeah, but they're not treating the data with respect there either,
well, Yeah, and I have a worldview which doesn't preclude bizarre things happening. So I have to have an open mind. So I mean, you talked about, or I guess I talked about Zaytun. So now you've talked about Tibetan parallels. This gives you some sense of what I'm trying to do with parallels. I'm not explaining away things. I'm just saying, what do these parallels mean? What do we do with them? What lessons can we take away?
Yeah. Hey, now let me ask you this, Dale. Of those six interpretations that you give in your book, so you're right. You arrive at no real conclusion. In fact, in your book, you don't even state which one you lean toward. But is there one of those interpretations, one or two of them, that you lean toward?
No, I'm absolutely honest when I say I have no business having an opinion because I don't know enough about this stuff. Now, I'm still trying to learn, and maybe at some point I will have an opinion. I will say this: I'm not theologically opposed on principle to this stuff being true. I suppose that there are many Christians who wouldn't like this. One of the things I observe, or I just ask as a question, well, uh, what theological fact would this destroy if it turned out to be true? Actually, the New Testament, whatever Matthew 27:51 through 53 is about, it actually does have other people coming back from the dead, or right. So Jesus isn't the only one. Anyway, I just pass this off. I don't know.
Yeah, and the stuff is interesting to discuss. A debate that I had a few years back with a popular atheist named Matt Dillahunty. Of course, as an atheist, he doesn't believe that any kind of spiritual or supernatural things happen. So I raised a number of things like well-evidenced near-death experiences, veridical apparitions, extreme answered prayer, paranormal phenomena. I even tried to give an example of each of those. I know a girl, Kim Earhart, who she comes from a family where her grandmother and mother were witches. They were involved in the occult, and she has actually witnessed some demonic stuff. I mean she's given me firsthand testimony of things that occurred while with a Ouija board and things. And it's like, okay, someone can just dismiss that. But then I've got a friend named Gary Hamrick, who's a pastor in Houston right now, a good friend of mine. And when he was in Maui, he experienced all kinds of demonic stuff. He saw, and some of these were in a group of 3 people, really bizarre stuff, the kind of stuff that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I've experienced some paranormal stuff that I would interpret as demonic. When you mention this kind of stuff to atheists, they just think that you're crazy, but they've just never experienced them themselves. Once you've experienced some of this stuff, then you know that atheism is false.
Well, that goes back to my quotation, from Gregory of Nyssa, who says we do tend to judge things, right, on the basis of our own experience. So one way of thinking about that is I don't think David Hume ever saw anything interesting. David Hume never saw anything out of the ordinary. If he had, he might have thought about things differently. I don't know what to say to people who haven't experienced anything truly out of the ordinary. All I can say is that in my familial and social circles, it's really weird. It's truly weird.
Yeah.
And by the way, I should also say that by truly weird, I mean I don't have any problem thinking that there are things that we could call evil spirits, and I want to attribute some things to God, but I also think there are a million things in the middle that are just weird and inexplicable, and I don't know what the heck is going on.
Yeah. All right. You also write in your book, quote, while God raised Jesus from the dead may cancel some options, atheism, for instance, it leaves many others open. Indeed, the inexplicable disappearance of Jesus' body and his post-mortem appearances do not, in and of themselves, even tell us what religion we should adopt. As observed in the previous chapter, some Buddhists explain what happened to Jesus in terms of their tradition. The same holds for some Hindus, end quote. And I agree with that. I think this is where the task of the historian, the work of the historian, I think it ends there. It's just like saying, the claim, Jesus died for our sins. Well, the historian can look at the historical element of that to say, well, Jesus did die. We can give arguments that he died by crucifixion in either the year 30 or 33. But the historian has no tools to be able to determine that his death atones for sins. And I think we can say the same thing here. I mean, I think the historian is within the right to look at the data, provide arguments, and conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. But that's where the work of the historian, as historian, ends. The historian can't say God did it. They can believe God did it, but as historian qua historian, really can't verify that God did it. Thoughts?
Well, so I'm not sure I want to go there with you. So I'm more skeptical than you are here. I still think that a worldview is interfering with your judgments as an historian. So let's say that I'm a rational historian, but I don't believe that weird things happen. So here's what I would do if I were that person. I would say, look, Jesus died. He really died. And he was buried. He was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. But we do know that there was a market for bodies, for corpses, for magical recipes. Actually, there are magical papyri that have recipes which include, body parts, including parts from people who have died violently. So I think if I were a skeptic, I would say, well, the tomb was empty. That's the story. And it was empty because there were robbers and they came in the night. And that's why the tomb is empty in the morning, because they came at night. And they didn't roll the stone back because they're in a hurry. They're doing something illegal. And so it's going to be empty and the stone is rolled away. And then if I were a skeptic, I would say, well, maybe Mary in mourning, Mary Magdalene, saw Jesus. And if I were a skeptic, I'd say, people see the dead a lot and it's all hallucination. Now, I don't think all visions are hallucinations. That's an important part of my book. I don't believe that. But a skeptic will say that.
And by the way, when you say vision, you're not just saying, some kind of something out of space-time. It could involve that, or it could be like, let's just say the Gospels are correct and Jesus appears to them in bodily form, that would include your definition of vision, right?
Wow, that gets really complicated really fast. Let me just set that aside, okay? Let me just talk to the skeptic, okay? So the skeptic is going to say, well, she hallucinated. Okay, let's just say hallucinated, right? But she's going to interpret this in terms of resurrection, because a skeptic could say, well, as Luke 19 has it, they went up to Jerusalem thinking the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. So she thought that the resurrection was at hand. So she's going to interpret the empty tomb in terms of resurrection, and she's going to think of Jesus as being raised from the dead because she's seen him and the tomb is empty. And then same thing's going to happen to Peter. And then if I were a skeptic, I'd say the 500 probably just saw something in the clouds like people do today. And so I think the skeptical historian has an out here. And I actually think it's your worldview that allows you to say, okay, he rose from the dead, but I don't know who the agent is. I think the skeptical historian can still say, without being an imbecile and without being totally uninformed, yeah, I got a story here. And the odds against it are considerable, but his response to you is always going to be, but a guy rising from the dead, the odds against that are pretty good too, right? Mm-hmm. So you look at his story and you say, what's the likelihood of all that coming together? But he's going to look at your story and say, what are the odds of that? So that's perhaps where you and I part company here. I am not the skeptic, but I think the skeptic has a better argument than maybe you think, okay? Maybe has an option that isn't as implausible as, let's say, Geza Vermesh's rather weak attempt to explain things.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate what you're saying there. I do want to take issue with it. We're out of time for this segment, so let's hold this thought, because on our next segment, our final segment, which will likely be quite a bit shorter than this one, I want to talk about method and stuff, historical method, because that directly relates to this. So Dale, thanks so much. This is fun interacting with you.
Thanks, Mike.